All right, let's get right into it. We hear this all the time, right? That our brains can change. But how does that actually work? What's the real nuts and bolts science behind it? Well, today we are breaking down the scientific protocol for literally rewiring your own brain, and it's all based on the work of Stanford neuroscientist Dr. Andrew Huberman. We're going to get into the very specific conditions and even the chemicals that you need to unlock your brain's amazing ability to adapt. And this is why this is such a big deal. As Dr. Huberman puts it here, neuroplasticity isn't just some cool fact for a biology textbook. It's the core mechanism that lets us learn, grow, and become better. It is the biological promise that we are not stuck, that change is always on the table if, and it's a big if, we know how to trigger it. So here's our game plan. First, we'll talk about the promise of plasticity itself. Then we're going to bust a huge myth about how change happens that trips a lot of people up. From there, we'll get into the absolute, non-negotiable science of focus. Then the fun part, a step-by-step protocol you can actually use. And we'll finish with the secret ingredient, the part where the change is actually cemented into your brain. Okay, section 1, the promise of plasticity. So the main idea to get your head around here is that your brain wasn't finished at birth. Not even close. You were born with this incredible nervous system that was designed from the ground up to become a customized map of your life. Every skill you learn, every language you speak, it all gets physically wired in. But there's a really critical shift that happens right around age 25. See, when we're kids, our brains are in this state of what's called passive plasticity. We're basically sponges, just soaking up everything around us without even trying. But as adults, the whole game changes. Plasticity becomes an active process. Those gates for easy, automatic change swing shut, and we have to learn how to deliberately pry them open again. So if adult change really requires this active, deliberate effort, that flies in the face of a very popular idea. And that brings us to our next section. We have to debunk the myth of easy change. Because honestly, getting this part right is the first real step to making any progress at all. So let me just ask you this straight up. Does every single thing you experience actually change your brain? I mean, it's a common idea, right? You go to a meeting, you have a chat with a friend, and people say, oh, your brain is different now. But for an adult, is that really true? And Huberman's answer could not be more clear. He says, absolutely not. In fact, he calls it one of the biggest lies in the universe. See, unless you're a little kid, your brain does not just automatically rewrite itself from every little experience. It only changes when a very specific cocktail of neurochemicals gets released that basically screams at your brain, hey, pay attention, this is important, we need to save this. So if it's not every experience, then which ones are they? Well, this leads us straight to the science of focus. This right here is the master key. It's the non-negotiable ingredient that unlocks the gates to adult neuroplasticity. Simple as that. Without it, nothing happens. And the proof for this really comes from this beautiful series of experiments back in the early 90s. These two researchers, Michael Merzenich and Greg Rickenzone at UCSF, they wanted to challenge that old idea that the adult brain was basically fixed. And what they found completely flipped our understanding of learning on its head. Okay, this is just brilliant. Look at this. They had people touch a spinning drum that had little bumps on it. Group 1, they were told to pay super close attention to the feeling of those bumps. And guess what? The part of their brain that maps their fingertips, it grew fast. Now look at group 2. They felt the exact same bumps, but they were told to focus their attention on a sound they were hearing. The result? Their auditory cortex changed, but the brain map for their fingers? Nothing, not a single change. The takeaway is just undeniable. Plasticity follows focus. Your brain only changes the circuits you pay attention to, period. So why is focus the magic trigger? Well, it's all about chemistry. There are 3 key chemicals that have to be there. First, you need epinephrine. You know it as adrenaline. This just creates alertness. It wakes your brain up and says something's going down. Second, you need acetylcholine from your brainstem. Think of this like a chemical spotlight. It zooms your perception in on one specific thing. And third, you need another shot of acetylcholine, this time from your forebrain, which is kind of like the manager giving the final okay for the change to happen. You get those 3 together, and your brain has no choice but to change. Okay, so that's the why, that's the science. Now for the really exciting part. How do we actually put this into practice? Section 4 is the step-by-step protocol for intentionally triggering this chemical state and engaging plasticity whenever you want. So here it is, the whole protocol at a glance. It's just 4 steps. 1, generate alertness to get that epinephrine flowing. 2, achieve deep focus to release the acetylcholine. 3, dive into a concentrated 90-minute learning session. And 4, this one is crucial, deliberately disengage and rest. Let's break down each one. First up, alertness. Easiest way to do this is just to work when you naturally have the most energy, but you could also manufacture it psychologically. And Huberman gives some pretty wild examples. You could commit to a goal publicly, so the fear of looking bad drives you. Or write a check to a political party you can't stand, to be mailed if you don't follow through. Or, on the other side, dedicate your work to someone you love. Here's the thing. Your brain's chemistry doesn't care. Fear, shame, love, it all releases epinephrine and signals that this matters. Now for step 2, focus. And if you only take one practical tool away from this entire thing, please let it be this one. This simple biological rule is the key to training your concentration. Your ability to focus your mind is directly physically tied to your ability to focus your eyes. So how do you use this? It's super simple. Before you start your work, you practice. Pick one tiny spot on your screen or on the wall and just stare at it. Don't let your eyes wander for 60 to 120 seconds. This simple act of narrowing your visual field literally activates the parts of your brain that release acetylcholine and epinephrine, and it primes you for deep focus. Oh, and if you're learning by listening to something, just close your eyes. You're basically creating a cone of auditory attention. Step 3 is the learning session itself, and the ideal length of time is about 90 minutes. Now, that's not some random number. It's based on what are called our ultradian cycles, these natural 90-minute rhythms of focus and energy that our brain and body move through all day long. It's just much easier to work with these rhythms than to fight against them. And I have to tell you something really important about this part. When you're in that 90-minute session, it probably shouldn't feel easy. That epinephrine in your system creates a feeling of agitation, of being on edge. Your mind will wander, and you'll have to keep dragging it back. That feeling of struggle, that friction, that is not a sign you're failing. It's a sign that your brain is perfectly primed for change. That struggle is the work. Okay, so you've gotten yourself alert, you focused like a laser for 90 minutes. You've done the hard part, right? Well, this brings us to the final, and honestly, the most counterintuitive step of all, mastering rest. Because everything we've talked about so far only sets the stage for change. The real magic happens next. And here it is. This is probably the single biggest insight about how our brains actually change. All that intense focus, all that struggle and agitation, that is not when your brain is actually rewiring. That whole process just marks the connections between your neurons with, like, a chemical post-it note that says, hey, this one is important, change this later. The actual rewiring, the physical strengthening and weakening of those connections, it happens when you're in deep sleep. The learning session flags the circuits that need renovating, but it's deep sleep that is the construction crew that comes in overnight to do the job. This is why getting a good night's sleep after learning something new is completely non-negotiable. Without it, those little post-it notes just fade away. But you can actually accelerate this whole process. A study in Cell Report showed that you don't even have to wait for a full night's sleep. A 20-minute nap, or even a brief session of what Huberman calls non-sleep deep rest, which is basically just a state of deep relaxation while you're awake, right after a learning session can seriously speed up the rewiring. So after your 90 minutes are up, don't just jump into the next thing, deliberately stop, let your mind wander, meditate, or just lie down for 20 minutes. So let's wrap this all up. Here are the key things to remember. First, as an adult, plasticity is an active sport. You have to bring intense focus. Second, you can kickstart this whole process by generating alertness and focus before you even start a 90-minute session. Third, remember that powerful link. Mental focus follows visual focus. Train your eyes to train your brain. And last, but maybe most important, the real change doesn't happen during the work. It happens during deep sleep and those rest periods right after. So look, this isn't just theory. It's a practical, science-backed toolkit. It's basically the user's manual for how our brains were designed to learn and adapt for our entire lives. So the only question left is, now that you have the protocol, what are you going to change first?